Hello, friends. This is Miss Hawk, the assistant principal for grades K1 and 2, and it's my pleasure to read a book to you today titled Lucia, Saint of Light. It's about Christmas traditions in Sweden. This book is written by Catherine Bolger Hyde and illustrated by Daria Fisher. Let's find out what happens. Today is my name day. My name is Lucy, and this is December 13, the Feast of Saint Lucia. It's one of my favorite days of the year. On this day, I wake up early before it's light. My sisters and I put on long white gowns trimmed with lace. Kristen and Ingrid are my attendants. They wear sashes and wreaths of tinsel. I'm the Lucia bride, so I tie my gown with a wide red ribbon. On my head goes a crown made of lingonberry leaves that holds 7 candles. When I put it on, I feel like St. Lucia herself, come to bring light and joy to the dark winter land. In the kitchen, I make a pot of coffee and pour it carefully into a blue and white china coffee pot my mother brought from Sweden. I put the coffee things on a tray with a plate of ginger cookies and special crisscross shaped sweet buns called Lucia or Lucia cats. My sisters help me, but my brothers Lars and Carl are too busy goofing around, using their Starboy hats for helmets and jousting with their star poles. Hush, I tell them, you'll wake Mom and Dad. When everything is ready, I hold the tray and lead the procession. We parade into my parents' bedroom and wake them up, singing a song about St. Lucia. Then we all sit on the big bed, munching cats, remember those crisscross shaped buns? And gingerbread, singing Christmas carols. We're all so cozy. I wish this part of the day could last forever. But the rest of the day is fun too. When my parents are dressed, we go next door to visit Mrs. Sundstrom. We bring her coffee and cat buns and sing to her as well. When we finish, she has tears in her eyes. She always says to me in her thick accent, "When I was a young girl in Sweden, I was the Lucia bride. You make me feel like a little girl in Sweden again." Then my mother sits on the bed and talks to Mrs. Sundstrom in Swedish for a while. I guess they're probably talking about Sweden. I've never been to Sweden, but my mother grew up there. She was a Lucia bride when she was a girl too. And when she came to America and married my father, she brought the tradition with her. Once when I was younger, I asked her to tell me about St. Lucia and why we celebrate her the way we do. "Well, it's kind of a peculiar story," my mother said. "You see, St. Lucia isn't actually a Swedish saint. She was born in Sicily, an island off the coast of Italy." Back when St. Lucia was born, in the late 3rd century, Sicily was part of the Roman Empire. Lucia's father was a wealthy nobleman, but he died when Lucia was a baby. Her mother raised her to be a Christian. "But wasn't it against the law to be a Christian back then?" I asked. My mother smiled. "You've been paying attention to the saints' lives in church, haven't you?" "Yes, it was against the law. Christians had to hide their faith or they risked being arrested, tortured, and put to death. You had to love God very much to take that risk." Lucia grew up loving God with all her heart. She loved him so much that she didn't want to marry anyone but her heavenly bridegroom, Jesus Christ. But her mother, Lucia, didn't understand this, and she arranged for Lucia to marry a man who was a pagan. After this, Lucia became very ill. Lucia persuaded her mother to go on a pilgrimage with her to St. Agatha's tomb. There, Lucia had a vision. St. Agatha appeared to her and told her God was pleased with her desire to remain a virgin. Lucia was healed, and Lucia begged her mother not to force her into marriage, but to let her give her dowry away to the poor instead. In those days, a girl could not be married without a dowry. Like the girls in the St. Nicholas story, I said. St. Nicholas left money in their stockings so they could get married. That's right. Well, after a while, Lucia's fiance heard that she and her mother were giving all their money to the poor. He wasn't happy about that at all. In fact, he was so angry that he went to the governor of the island, Pasacius, and told him that Lucia was a Christian. Pasacius had Lucia arrested and brought before him. He commanded her to sacrifice to the idols, but she, of course, refused. She said she had given everything she owned as a sacrifice to Jesus Christ, and now she was ready to offer her life to him as well. But when the soldiers tried to take her away to torture her, the Holy Spirit made her so heavy she could not be moved. They tried pulling her with ropes, even tying her to several yoke of oxen, but nothing could make her budge from the spot. Then, in a rage, Pasacius ordered that she be burned. The soldiers piled wood around her and lit the fire. But Lucia prayed to God, and the fire did not so much as singe a hair on her head. She only glowed with a holy light through the flames. Finally, one of the soldiers drove his sword into her throat. Lucia said one last prayer, then gave up her spirit into the hands of her heavenly bridegroom. She was buried with honor and became the patron saint of her city, Syracuse. I snuggled closer to my mother. The story was scary, but it gave me a warm glow inside to know that I was named for such a brave and holy girl. But I was still confused. If Lucia is the patron saint of Syracuse, how come they celebrate her in Sweden? And you can see they're pointing to Sweden here in Europe. The Swedes love St. Lucia because she saved Sweden from a terrible famine. Back in the Middle Ages, the people of southern Sweden were starving. On the darkest day of the most terrible winter of all, they saw a boat sailing toward them across Lake Vänern. One of those Viking boats with a dragon on it? I suppose so, but instead of a dragon's head at the prow, there stood a beautiful maiden, dressed in all white and glowing with an unearthly light. The people stood amazed as the boat glided toward the shore, with no wind and no oars to propel it, no man at the tiller to guide it. And when the boat reached land, St. Lucia handed out huge sacks of wheat to all the people until the boat was empty. The people would have bread to eat all winter long. What a very nice gesture. I sighed happily. My saint was not only brave, but kind as well. Is that why Lucia brides wear candles on their heads? Because she was glowing in the boat? Partly that. There was also a legend that Lucia used to visit Christians hiding in the catacombs. In order to keep her hands free to carry the food she brought them, she wore candles on her head. That legend might have started because the name Lucia comes from the Latin word for light. Also, her day falls in the darkest part of the winter. In Sweden, the winter nights are very long indeed, with only a few hours of daylight. So St. Lucia came to be associated with the return of the light. My mother smiled. Any more questions, my curious Lucy cat? I thought for a minute. Why do we wear white dresses? Because St. Lucia was the bride of Christ, and the red sash is a symbol of martyrdom. And we go to visit people like Mrs. Sundstrom because St. Lucia went to visit the poor and the prisoners. My mother gave me a squeeze. That's right. What about the Lucia cats, I asked. They symbolize the wheat she brought in the famine, and they're shaped like a cross because St. Lucia was martyred for Christ. But where does the coffee come in? My mother laughed. That's just because Swedes love coffee. She sipped from her steaming mug to prove it. I took a cat bun off the heaping plate on the coffee table and thought about all the people St. Lucia had fed. Mom, can we take these buns over to the Luboviches? I bet they don't get treats like this very often. She kissed the top of my head. That's a wonderful idea, sweetheart, and we can sing for them too. I hope you enjoyed the story of St. Lucia and its origin of the winter holiday in Sweden. I'm Miss Hawk, and it was my pleasure to read to you.